Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the KPC podcast, and we're happy to have you along for the ride. We spent some time this last week leading up to Sunday in Luke 6, and specifically verses 37 to, it was like 42, I believe. Yep. So not a ton of text, but still a lot going on. Mm-hmm. This is Jesus' teaching on not judging, not condemning, on learning to be generous, on following the right teacher, on loyalty, I think, as we put it on Sunday, but who we follow and who we learn from and who we apprentice ourselves to mattering significantly. And then ultimately landing on it. What was the third one? I can't. It was generosity, loyalty, and integrity was the third one. So good kingdom principles to live by. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to jump into some conversation to wrap up that discussion. Mm-hmm. And we're finishing off Luke 6 this week. Yeah, which will be great. So, we hope it encourages you to have good, meaningful conversation. And as always, we would love to hear some of your questions and feedback that you have. You can reach us on email is the best way to send your questions to us. We always check the email before recording.
Yep, always. And
yep.
It's a lot of fun when we get one, like, it'll be, I would get in usually just before 9:00 a.m. on Monday morning and be like, okay, let's see what we got. And sometimes it'll be one that came in like at 8:30. Like, this is great. Yeah.
Perfect.
It's been like a lot of great discussion, between the community Bible study and then the sermon and then the podcast. As we've been saying, it's been a great little trifecta. But this past week in particular, a lot of not heated, but like a lot of like, there's an intensity to the discussion of this passage, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'll hop in there while you choke on coffee. What I think too, like week 3, right? Week 3 of the
getting more comfortable.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Which is really fun to see. So like I would put a little plug in there for small groups because I do just want to say, like, shout out to the people who jumped into community Bible study. And we know that many of you wanted to, but weren't able to. And some of you are trying it for the first time and didn't know what you were in for. But like you don't sign up for a group. So you sign up, there's 100 and change people, like there's 104 or 5 people coming out. And we put you in groups. So you show up, you maybe know people at your table, maybe you don't.
But that's kind of the point.
But that's exactly the point is, you get to have conversation with people and interact with folks who maybe you don't usually on a Sunday or throughout the week. And it just contributes to the breadth of experience. And like I find this beautiful, encouraging moment to look out over all the groups and see the breadth of life experience and age. The intergenerational piece to conversation is always, I think, really encouraging. Mm-hmm. And one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten throughout this study of what people appreciate, I think some of the younger, not maybe younger Christians in terms of new to faith, but younger in age, getting to have conversations with folks who've been around for 60 years in the church, 70 years in the church. And that's really beautiful. So the small group piece, the small group plug is, that's actually what we want for all of our community life to begin to look like, is not just during community Bible study, but throughout the entirety of the year for you to find yourself in a small group. And maybe that's a small group of friends, but probably more likely it's a small group of people who are also looking for meaningful conversation. And there's a beauty in just trying to get into that level of discussion. So that's what I think that's what we would love to see, is for this to continue on through all of life.
Yeah. We last year when we did the community Bible study, we had an offshoot group after that my wife and I hosted at our place for kind of between, I guess it was mid-May through to the end of June kind of thing, just for like a month and a half. And it was very similar, very like, everyone from, us in our late 30s to some people in their 20s, some people in their 50s, 60s. It was a blast. Like
Yep.
it was a lot of fun. And so highly recommended. There are not many contexts in our world. We talked about this before. There are not many contexts in our world where you get the chance to interact with such a diversity of age, where it's that level of mutuality and learning from one another. Like when you go to school, you are in your age category and you are learning from someone who's older than you. There's not usually a lot of reciprocal learning, right? Whereas this is, there is a way to learn from one another and honor one another, and it's a beautiful picture of the kingdom of God.
Yep.
Yeah. So, judging others, a lot of meat in this passage, a lot of things for consideration, potentially some confusing things. And so the first question I want to jump into is when we look at Jesus's call to not judge. Do not judge, you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. At the very end, and this is where I admit I've gotten this passage wrong. I have literally preached on this passage early on. I remember it. It was one of my maybe even one of my first like public sermons. I pray it's gone off the internet, but maybe it is somewhere. I don't know. But where I took the last section, so he ends. Then he says, first, take the plank out of your own eye. After all these analogies about planks and specks, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And what I inferred from that, and I think incorrectly now, is that means once I have taken care of my stuff, once I've dealt with my stuff, judge away.
I can take care of your stuff too.
That was my takeaway.
Sure,
that was
sure.
and man, that is not what Jesus is saying here. But what I think it sparks for me is a question about judgment versus discernment. We are called to be discerning. In fact, I think like it's considered a spiritual gift of sorts to have a discerning mind.
Yeah.
That there are people that are better at discerning than others. And in our English language, we would actually sometimes exchange those words. Like that person can judge rightly. That they can look at a person, a situation, and discern or judge, right? So that's maybe where it gets a little confusing.
Yep.
Is judging and discernment can have some overlap.
Yep.
But not always.
Yeah.
Where would we draw the line there? And where would we see us living out our call to be a wise and discerning people versus a judging, or maybe the most negative iteration of that word, a judgmental?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a great question. I love it. We're jumping in. I want to answer it two ways. I think there's a quick answer that I want people to remember, and that is, I think when we've felt on the receiving end of these, judgment is away from life. I think that the judgment that Jesus is talking about here when he says stop judging is a judgment that leads away from life and away from flourishing and toward exile and isolation and loneliness. Yeah. And I'll get into why in a minute. But so judging leads away from life. Discerning, I would say, leads toward life. And I think that's a good principle just to sit with and think in my own life as I go. Am I helping people? Am I myself learning to see clearly in a way that leads toward life for myself and for others? Or am I living in a way that leads away from life and toward exile and loneliness and isolation? So I think that's a helpful starting question, because it again, just a quick on the way, rule for the road kind of mindset to have. Is my action leading toward life? And if you have to justify or rationalize it, well, be like, well, they're sinful, so it's going to hurt now, but it's going to lead them toward life. Like,
it's kind of like the my loving you looks like actually I'm gonna make you feel like garbage.
Right.
But it's in love. It's
So
truth and love.
If you have to rationalize it or like justify it in your own mind, probably not. I think those in my life who I would call the most discerning usually speak up the last and least. Like they're ones who are slow to speak and who speak slowly. So I think we rush to judgment, and I think we slow down toward discernment. So is it leading toward life? Is it slowed down? Is it leading away from life toward isolation? Is it rash, quick, easily just done? So I think those are helpful starting points. If I back up though, there's a really interesting thread through this passage that we didn't touch on much during the Bible study, and I didn't touch on at all during the sermon. And that is, so the link between where Jesus says, do not judge, and then in the end where he says, you'll be able to see clearly to take out the speck from your brother's eye. There is a connection there. And so if you look at the way Jesus says, if I just back up here, so judge, this was, I believe, mentioned, I believe it was Lindsay who pointed this out to everybody at the Bible study.
She's a smart one.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that to judge has this social implication of cutting off. So it's not just judging as in I've decided that what you are doing is wrong, right? And we like doing that. We like being like the armchair judge. Like, I've decided you're wrong. Usually what that means is I've decided I'm right.
Yeah.
So, that's also just something to watch out for. But in Jesus's day, this idea of judging and krino, that verb to judge, that Jesus says stop doing, actually is a judgment that includes this social isolation or casting out. So to judge someone actually implied that they were also cast out of Christian community. Well, in Jesus' day, it wasn't Christian community, it was the Jewish community. And to be a member of that community was like your salvation was wrapped up in your membership to the Jewish community. And so to cast out from the Jewish community is like, we're talking now to cast away from, like, you're no longer part of the covenant people of God. You no longer have access to your rites and rituals of spiritual formation, forgiveness, reconciliation with God, with others, all of it. So this is judgment toward literal isolation, like social, emotional, relational isolation, but also toward religious exclusion. So like, that's a really serious move to make against somebody. And so Jesus says, like, stop judging them, stop condemning them. And really, I think those two words together are like, that's the full force of what this casting out looks like. So you are judging them, you're casting them out, you're condemning them. And it's almost like you say, you're condemning them toward a way of death, socially, relationally, emotionally, spiritually, in the sort of holistic way we understand human beings. And
condemning sort of has that, implication a little bit more than judging, right? At least in our modern language.
Yeah. So then to jump down to where Jesus says, it's not the same word, but where he says, you'll be able to take the splinter out. What he actually says is ekbalo, cast out. So the flip is to move from, so he says, stop judging people, the person. Don't cast the person out. He says, cast the splinter out. So in my reading of it, and I don't think like that's just not like my reading, I've got the reading of this. That's not what I'm saying.
There are lots of scholars who
right.
helpful
So
in
in my reading of this, understanding of commentaries and like in our prep for the Bible study, in all of it, prep for the sermon, I see this as a move from being ones who judge and cast out other people, to being ones who cast out the things that hurt one another.
Right. So distinguishing between the person and the actions that are potentially harmful to them, to others around them.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And I'm not saying what it be like. I'm not just, this isn't just like another version of like, hate the sin, love the sinner.
I was just gonna say
this isn't that.
Yeah. No.
But like I think we take that splinter and log analogy and connect it with judging, and think that Jesus is saying, well, don't judge unless you've first judged yourself and dealt with your own stuff, and then you can judge others. Mm-hmm. But what he's really saying is, don't cast people out toward death, right? He says, forgive, give. So it's this restoration, bring back into community, embrace, move them toward life.
Yeah.
The splinter and the log, like it's not judgment that he's enabling or talking about. I think he's actually saying like, it sucks having something stuck in your eye. Like it hurts.
Help each other.
Help one another.
Yeah.
Help one another deal with the things of pain and sorrow and sadness and sin. Like help heal one another.
There are things that I can't see clearly. Help me.
Help. Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you license to judge.
Yeah.
It gives you the ability to love and care and heal one another. So like it's a relief to get that splinter pulled out. Like when you have something in your eyes, like I wear glasses, but I wear contacts all the time when I run, play hockey, etc. So, like you wear do you wear contacts? You don't wear contacts, no. When you have something underneath a contact, or that contact gets like flipped sideways, like it's painful. I remember the first time like I lost a contact into like the side of my eye, and I couldn't get it out. Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't see to get the contact back on the right side of my eye. I'm like, had visions of it's like, it's on the back of my eye. It's gone forever, which is physically impossible. I realized that much. Like I stayed in, school long enough to figure that much out. But, like it hurts, and it like sometimes you need somebody else to fix what is broken in you, or at least help you.
So then you get your wife like fishing through
your
eyeball.
She couldn't do it. She couldn't do it. She could never wear contacts. That's just by her own admission, would.
The common occurrence in our house is well, not that common, but relatively common is I'll hear like a shriek from the bathroom, and it'll be like, my contacts are on the floor.
Yep.
I can't find them because my contacts are out.
Yep.
And so then I'll pull up my like flashlight, and you're like, oh. It takes us like usually 5 minutes to find them.
And then you don't want it back anyways.
No.
So
anyway,
this is it though. Like this is, I think because of the way Matthew has those same verses, similar verses ordered, it is like one immediately after the other. We want to hold those things together. And I do think that there is a reading that is helpful. Like we do need to see, like Jesus is saying, don't judge. And he is saying, deal with your own stuff. And he is saying, don't point other people's stuff out while not dealing with your own stuff. But in the end, he doesn't say, it's not a return to judging the person. I do think there's this beautiful image where he says, expel the thing that harms one another.
Yeah.
So his move is toward life always. And that's why in the sermon, I turned to Henry Nouwen, who talks about becoming, like learning to be a wounded healer. Like your wounds, your stuff, it doesn't disqualify you from helping one another, from living life inside the kingdom. But you need to deal with it so that it doesn't harm when you're trying to help. Jesus says, like, he said, you're trying to help the person. He's not saying that you're trying to harm them. But even best intentions, you can still harm somebody with a plank sticking out the front of your face. So it's a comedic way of saying, learn to help one another. But it's like, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Like, if you pass out, you can't help anybody.
Yeah.
Right? It really is. I think it's a movement away from exclusion toward embrace. And then it's the continuation of that that Jesus works out, where he says, you've dealt with your own stuff enough that you can learn to help one another.
I'm picturing like a scenario where, say, a person is struggling with, I don't want to choose anything too intense, but also not too like
lying,
stealing. Yeah, let's just say lying, right? That they are someone who is often extending or bending the truth.
Sure. Yeah.
For me, I have multiple options. I could judge them and just say what a wretched person they are for being a liar. Like, they lied to me and I'm pretty mad about it. And I have a lot of, I want them out of my life. I want them, whatever. I want them out of the church community, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an option. That would be the do not judge part of the equation where I am judging. The other part that I need to take into account, I'm just kind of trying to unpack this for like what this looks like in real time, is then I need to then look within. I say, where have I been untruthful? Where like if I'm going, and I'm not saying I should judge this person, but if I'm gonna judge them, I better at least look inside. But then Jesus then takes it further and says, no. This should take you through multiple layers of like checks and balances, so that instead of judging them, you want to aid them in their journey of toward wholeness, toward stopping lying, because their lying is hurting the community or themselves or their family or whatever. Right. And so like that's, I just wanted to kind of unpack that as like a way to sort of like, okay, don't judge. That's how you do it in this situation. Look internally, then help.
Yeah, I think so. I think listen, like, I think this is where we continue to struggle to do things well and right, and in ways that help. Because I do think that the best, like the most well-intentioned Christians can still, in wanting to help somebody, communicate in a way that excludes or that drives away.
Totally.
But there also needs to be, like, it's what Jesus isn't saying is avoid honest conversation, right? So I think it does matter. And it's like, it's taken out of context. But John Mackay, who I've talked about many times, probably on the podcast already, has a line in Mission Work where he says that we as Christians need to earn the right to be heard.
Yes.
And, what he's saying is essentially you need, there needs to be a level of trust and sincerity and relationship that has been built in order for you to be able to proclaim the gospel into somebody's life in a way that actually transforms them. And I would say that the same thing is true here.
Yeah.
That you're like, one of the things I would hope that you would take into account as you pray through and wrestle through, like, I'll say confronting somebody on something, is what is the relational capital that you have? And is this going to drain it? Like, are you overextending? Is it like, well, I can buy that car with X amount of cash and then also this amount of line of credit and that loan plus this extra,
You're
gift
using
over here.
It all.
Probably shouldn't be doing it, right? It's so I think that that is one of the things you need to take into account is honestly assessing, that relationship. Jesus does lay out a paradigm for conflict, right? Where you are supposed to go one-on-one to someone you have conflict with. And if that doesn't work, he says, gather some people around you. He said, gather the elder, like gather, a group of people, go together. And so like there has to be room for that inside the kingdom. But I do think that the burden falls on you, me, you, whoever's listening, watching, to do most of the hard heart work internally. Before we adjust. Like I guess the last thing I would say, and I'm probably repeating myself now, is I think, again, these are meant to be rules for the road. They're meant to be quick, like aphorisms was the word that we used at Bible study on Wednesday. They are true statements about life inside the kingdom. They have meaning across all of life and time and space. And that doesn't deplete, that doesn't diminish their meaning and the impact and influence. But it also is like, we're probably not meant to pick apart every possible iteration or scenario where we could or couldn't apply these things. And I would say, like, do you have a bent toward, are you more likely, do you more often point out other people's stuff? Or do you spend more time looking at your own heart in your own life? That's probably like the extent to which we say, like, just leave it there. Spend more time working on your own stuff and less time working on other people's stuff. Spend enough time working on your own stuff that you genuinely care about the other person experiencing life in a fuller measure.
Because it's not just about like, I'm going to mind my own business. I'm just going to do my own thing. It's not about that. I mean, there are times when, yes, we should just mind our own business, but
fair.
It seems as though it is more about, I need to make sure if I am going to have a hopefully loving, hopefully what they can feel cared for. If I'm going to have that conversation with someone about an area of their life that I'm concerned about, am I spending more time looking inwardly, or am I looking constantly to point out people's faults, right? That if I have a bent toward that, what's that about? What do I might need to explore that further. And I think even more broadly, I've heard it said, and there's been some, data to back this up, that often our world more broadly sees Christians as some of the most judgmental people on earth.
And hypocritical.
Hypocritical, both. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is an area, without being like overly like melodramatic, like this really matters for our witness, for just our credibility in the world. Like maybe that's worth diving into for a moment, of just like how we do this passage can have a massive impact on whether or not someone is potentially even open to the message of Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, so absolutely worth hammering home, like for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus. Barna did I think it was Barna and Pew Research jointly, but anyways, Barna did a long study of, I think it was largely millennials. Yeah. And back in the day when millennials were the up and coming generation,
when we were like in our 20s,
when we were the cool ones.
It was like, I think it was like 2007 or something like that, somewhere around there.
And one of the questions was, so the questions posed to people who would not identify as Christians, for a variety of reasons. But do you view Christians, was the question, do you view Christians as ones who align more with Jesus or with the Pharisees? And the vast majority, and I don't remember the exact percentages, but I think it was like 80% or something.
Yeah.
High 70s, maybe low 80s, said that they perceived Christians' actions to align more with those of the Pharisees than those of Jesus. And so that's not a pastor saying that. That's not Christians of our own, in our own judgment and like denominationalism, and like that's not, we're not saying that of ourselves. That's how we're perceived by the vast majority of a generation of people who either never grew up in the church or who walked away from the church.
Yeah.
So like, I think we need to hear that and go back to these passages again, because I think if we're rationalizing getting to judgment, like, we missed the whole plot, right? If we are explaining away the general principles of like, no, Jesus is saying live generously. If we're like, well, but when can I judge? Like, surely at some point I'll be good enough to judge others. He says, no, judgment is mine, says the Lord.
Unless you're going to go to law school and then work your way up to being a literal judge, don't judge.
Sure. Fair.
Different kind of judging.
But you're right. Yeah. Like this is, I think this is a battle for all of, for many, many Christians, if not every single Christian.
Yeah.
We Christians are our own worst PR nightmare. Like,
yeah.
So it is. I do think it matters. The way we do this matters tremendously. The way we learn to be generous, overly abundant, right? Gracious with people. And Jesus says that it needs to include honesty and living an integrated life, put back together, mended. Yeah.
I think it's worth noting, because I'm thinking of some scenarios where some folks have said, man, Christians are so judgmental about this person or situation or whatever, and I would say, yeah, you're not wrong. However, I think this is where we need to distinguish between what is taking the splinter out versus, say, what is having boundaries. So once, if a person has done some awful things, say they're a Christian in the name of Jesus, whatever, they've done some awful things. It's probably just worth reiterating that it's not judgmental to say, I am not going to put you in a position of authority in this way anymore. Yep. Or I am, if someone is a thief, I'm not going to put them in charge of the finances, even if I have forgiven them. Like again, there is wisdom, there is discernment, and then there is judgment. And those are different things. And we can discern and in community, hopefully not just by ourselves in isolation, but we can discern and say that's probably not a wise choice, right? So I just think it's worth highlighting that I've heard some folks critique, like fellow Christians critique other fellow Christians about their judgmental attitudes, when really it's like, no, that's probably a wise choice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. So the piece that you said, though, that I want to double down on is the in community, right? Because I think that's the mechanism or the environment, the ecosystem in which discernment happens. So again, like if we're looking for quick, sort of simple principles, judgment happens in isolation much more. At least begins. Like I think it begins in yourself.
Yeah.
And then, at our worst, we're like, hey, let's judge this guy together. You're right. Check this
which
guy
we
out.
never say outright, but
no, but like that's the right. So, judgment happens in isolation. Discernment happens, I would say, by and large, in community.
Yeah.
So if everybody around you is saying this person should not be in a position of leadership, and you're saying, but I believe they could be or should be. I'm just saying, like, be pretty crystal. You gotta be very certain if you are the one inside of a community saying this, or if there's a situation that has risen, like has arisen where, you know, you are saying, like, in a family setting, I'll say, if the family together have discerned that there needs to be some level of boundary with a particular individual, it's probably something worth listening to.
Yeah.
If you're the only person saying, yeah, but maybe not, like, I don't agree. And that's not, I'm not saying that the crowds are always right.
No.
And the individual's always wrong. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that God gives discernment in community, just like he calls in community, right? And encourages and equips and these things toward life in community as well. You know, I know, we are most encouraged inside of community.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think why would the same not be true also for some of these more harder but negative implication conversations should also be truest in community.
And there's like I've talked with some folks who have a wonderful level of self-awareness where they will say, I'm not as discerning on these matters as, say, my spouse or someone else, right? Yeah. And so they're like, you know, I know that about myself. And so therefore I'm going to defer to them sometimes. Right. Yeah. And I think that could be true for community more broadly as well. It's saying, like, hey, I don't have my spidey senses don't go off in the same way that yours do. Right. Yeah. And so, like, let me hear what you're trying to say so that I can understand. And even if I may not agree, I'm going to defer and submit to you out of, you know, just your wisdom and leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. Last thing I want to say on kind of this trajectory. And I'm going to spoil next week's sermon already.
Love it.
But so far in 6, during the Sermon on the Plain, we've seen Jesus talk about far more topics related to the heart than action. So I think that's important just to highlight that the blessings and woes are meant to be this introspective looking in myself and ourselves as a community. The love for enemies has more to say to me than it does my enemy, right? We talked about how we often want to say more to our enemy than we want that situation to speak to us. But loving our enemies is this internal battle that we have to move through and sort of reckon with. And now judging others and condemning, learning to be generous. Again, this is introspective work. This is heart work. This is work that I need to do on myself far more than it is about the other person. Like Jesus says, stop judging and you will not be judged, which we haven't even touched on yet, but stop judging. He really doesn't care about who you're judging. He's like, it's not stop judging unless they're deserved, right? Unless they deserve it. But he's just saying, stop doing it. And he says, stop condemning. So it's introspective. All of the Sermon on the Mount up to this point has essentially been saying, do the hard work of self-examination, of humility, the heart work that is like turned in on yourself, not to exclude others, but because who you are matters in terms of how you are going to live in the kingdom. And so he's saying, do all this work. Now he flips in 43 and he says very clearly, no good tree bears bad fruit. He says there is a purpose to doing all this work. It's not just for yourself. It's for the other. It's so that this community can explode and so that people will encounter fully formed individuals who are living life inside the kingdom. Yeah. And then he says, but if you do that work, you're not going to bear bad fruit. If you don't do that work, you're probably going to bear bad fruit. Trees are going to be recognized by their fruit. We go, I'm going to recognize your fruit and I'm going to recognize your fruit and I'm going to like good fruit over here, bad fruit over there. But no, what he's saying is your fruit will be recognized, right? Your heart will be recognized. Who you are will be recognized by the fruit that flows out of who you are. And then he says, for out of the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And it's almost like we finally get to this, so what already?
Right.
Right?
If your heart is full of judgment,
Yep.
that will pour out in your mouth, in your words, in your actions.
Yep. And so what Jesus is doing, he's creating the new Israel, right? Like this is biblical Israel, people of God, called and equipped to bless others, always for a purpose. Jesus calls 12 disciples, names them apostles, 12 tribes of Israel. We go, new Israel, new people of God, called for a purpose, to be a witness in the world. And now Jesus is saying, do that hard work so that out of your mouth comes good things of the kingdom. And so we finally get to this point where Jesus, it really, he's been building this teaching, and it's like, here's the so what.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm always insistent on, like, up to this point we've been, it has had more to say about who we are and who we are becoming than the other, because now Jesus wants to flip and say, actually go and do this good work in the world, speak good things, bear good fruit.
It's work that leads to life. Like that you talked about that a little bit already. Like that it's, and you know, a tree bearing good fruit is a tree that is bearing life, right? And that seems to be almost the choices we are making here is, will you choose judgment and death and exclusion and exile, or will you choose life? So one other question kind of connected to Jesus's statements about judging, and he says, do not judge and you will not be judged. Same thing for condemnation. The question that I have is, what is that? What does it even mean? Like, who is the one judging me? Is it other people? Is it God? Is it both? Is it, and is the implication, if I don't judge, then I will not be judged, because that feels like I could be the least judgmental person I know and possibly still could be judged. So like, what's going on here? We talked a little bit about last week, Christian karma. You talked about it a little bit in your sermon on Sunday. We'd be curious as we've kind of unpacked this, where your head is at.
Yeah. I keep going back to silly illustrations of TV shows and characters who can't give gifts without, or receive gifts without also giving gifts of comparable value. Right. And we struggle with this. I think we also struggle with this. If I receive something, do I have to give something back? How many times do you have to say thank you? In what form? Like, you have to write. This is always one. After you get married, do you have to write a thank you card to every single person for the gift that they gave? Yes. Like, still technically, yes, absolutely. It's good to say thank you.
It absolutely is.
Absolutely, it's good to be grateful.
But it's a pain in the butt.
It's hard to do. Yeah. I just think like we wrestle with this idea, right? And I think, and stop me if I said this last week already, but I think it might be worth saying again. I almost think we want it to be as simple as that, because not because we are good at giving, but because we suck. We have a really hard time receiving grace. So I think we want it to be, if this, then that. If I don't judge, I won't be judged. Right? If I don't condemn, then I won't be condemned. I don't want to be condemned, and I don't want to be judged. Therefore, I will not judge, and I will not condemn, because I receive what I give, and I don't want to receive it, so I won't give it.
Great. Done. Perfect.
Yeah. Now, you and I know that that's impossible.
Yeah.
Because I am going to judge, and I am going to condemn, and I am going to, like, human beings are prone toward those things.
Yeah.
So does that mean I will be judged? Like, I think Jesus in part is working out what is true about humanity. Like, he's not working it out as in like figuring it out. What I mean is he's fleshing it out for people. This is true.
Yeah.
There is some level of reciprocity in generosity or like stinginess. And we talk about culture. So let's talk about culture of churches for a second, because, you know, why would that be relevant? Okay. I've gone into some church, like there are churches with millions of dollars in the bank, but who live fearful to spend any of it because they might lose all of it. And then what will they be? What will they have? What will they do? And that culture explodes inside of a church when every decision is funneled through is this gonna tap into our capital? Do we have the money to do it? How are we going to replace it? What income is this going to bring in to replace the income that or the expense that goes out?
Right.
Like everything, you know, it's just this mindset of scarcity where there's never enough, where fear drives and wins the day, drives decisions, and it's contagious.
In the worst sense of the word.
Absolutely. Yeah. The flip, though, is where somebody chooses to be generous. Generosity is also contagious. And when I scale it out and I say, what's Jesus trying to do? Well, he's trying to form a community. He's not trying to. He is forming a community. He is telling us how life will be inside the kingdom.
Yeah.
And I almost think there is a little bit of a way to read this where he says, stop judging, and guess what? You'll live inside of a community where people aren't judged.
If you're all doing it,
including you.
Yeah.
Like it's about culture creation. It's about like the values of the kingdom. And as much as I hate it, it kind of is what goes around comes around. But not on the individual, this for that, if this, then that mathematical ledger equation type, rigid expense sheet.
If you're talking through that idea of Jesus speaking in aphorisms, and you know, these little pithy statements that are true, like what he's saying is the less you all as a people judge, the less you will all receive judgment because no one's doing the judging.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing that we do too often is we individualize these statements.
Yeah.
And I try not to say like, well, if I have one regret from the sermon that I preached on Sunday, because that's not my theology of the sermon. Like it's preached, God does something.
Yeah.
And God's going to do what he's going to do with it. And I go, oh, cool. I just get to sit back and watch. However, in a different iteration, if I were to preach this sermon again for our community next week, let's say, same passage.
Different take.
Which I really want to try someday.
Yeah.
Be like, we're going to do, you know, this is something that I learned from, at Princeton, some of my fellow seminarians, which is the weirdest word. That's a terrible word. Anyways, some fellow students who are from the Black church, like Southern church in the States. They and forgive me if it's not only this community who does this, but my experience of it was this is something very specific to the Black church in the States. They will have these days where 7 preachers will get up and preach on the same passage.
That's so cool.
I sat there. I absolutely love it.
I'm sure entirely different sermons.
Wildly different. And it like, but the most encouraging thing you would think would be like, does it drive to like competition and like whose sermon is like just the most beautiful, grace-filled, encouraging services where you get multiple people hopping up. And I've probably missed a whole lot of what it actually is. But you know, I would love to do like, we're going to stay on the same passage for a couple of weeks. If I were to do this again, the piece that I would draw us back to is Jesus isn't saying to the individual,
Yeah.
You, individual, do not judge, and you, individual, you will not be judged. He's saying, and not judge. That's literally what he says. Me krinete. Stop judging.
Yeah.
Don't do it. To the community.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, community, don't judge.
Mm-hmm.
And you should not be judged is actually literally what he says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you as a community, don't be a community of judgment. Right? So in all of its shapes and forms, don't judge one another. But if you're not judging one another, you're probably not being judged. As a community, don't be a community that judges other communities. Mm-hmm. Teach people how to not judge so that you should not be judged. Like there is a way in which I think he's building out a culture of the kingdom that teaches, don't judge. You should not be judged, because this whole culture is about non-judgment.
It's one of our fatal flaws as modern Christians that we do too frequently read these passages through the individualistic lens.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certainly times to do that. And there is always the moment, as we've said, to look inwardly and introspectively within yourself. But we cannot lose the broader community, congregational impact that these teachings are meant to have for us. It's critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I do think there's a little bit of just acknowledgement that we have to give it, that we're saying, like Jesus is saying, don't judge, and you probably won't be, because you'll become a community that doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's true. It's just true. What it's not doing is that individual ledger of, one to one or person to God. Like, it's just, there's a lot of different ways that we can fail in reading this.
Yeah.
If I judge somebody, am I going to lose my salvation? Right? Like, was, I think, actually a question that somebody brought up at the community Bible study was like, to what degree are we talking here?
Well, even more for, say, condemnation, like,
Right.
if I'm receiving condemnation, if I'm receiving that from God, that feels pretty severe.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, the condemn is just an extra measure of judgment.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's so it's to judge down, I think, technically. Is it or judge over? I'm going to look it up really quick. But anyways, it really is talking about, it's to judge down. According to down, it intensifies, to act as judge.
It feels like a more external outworking of that judgment.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? Because I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Someone brought it up on Wednesday.
Yeah.
That judge is often an inward act that we're doing in our heart. And then condemning is sort of the outward working of it.
Yeah.
And then the inverse, forgiving often has to start in our hearts.
Yeah.
Because as we said, we can, forgive people after they've passed away. We can forgive people that we never have to face, right? Giving is the outward working of what happens when we have forgiven.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So he's saying, stop judging, stop condemning, forgive, and give extra measure of grace.
Yeah.
Which is where we land with generosity, right? Which is how ultimately we landed there.
Yeah.
I don't think it's Christian karma, because what Jesus is moving us toward is giving the extra measure of grace. And we talked about this last week, but grace is this unmerited favor. And so Jesus is saying to stop, to do, but it's never a equal measure all the way through, right? And he says it, extra measure will be given. So
that feels like a good place to stop, I think. And just what an awesome passage to unpack, and has so many great implications for us as a church community, and excited to see how we can live this out. And I hope that this, as we go through this process, that we're not just gaining head knowledge. We're not just learning about the Greek words and whatnot, but we are actually saying, how can this make a difference? And this is very plain to me. How can we become a community that are known for their forgiveness and generosity, and less so for their judgment and condemnation?
Yeah.
So however that looks for you, whether you are discussing that amongst your family, small group, whatever that looks, we hope that you're able to take these discussions into your world, into your life, and explore how you can really make them real in our church community and in your lives. Have a great week.